Welcome to Observations, an open conversation about women's health. This is a space where physicians, patients, and other experts can sit down and have honest, evidence-based dialogue that cuts through the media bias and brings clarity back to maternal care and how we can care for both patients, mother and preborn child. With each episode, we will have real stories, real science, but also real questions about women's health today. From clinical insights to lived experiences, to aligned perspectives, and yes, also respectful disagreements. This is our goal, to bridge the gap between physician and patient, to empower informed decision-making, and bring back and elevate compassionate, fact-driven care. Now, a quick note before we dive in. Not every guest on the podcast is going to represent the views or positions of AAPLOG, but we believe that having open and honest conversations are going to make us better. So, grab your coffee, settle in, and let's get into today's observation.
For today, Dr. Christina Francis. It's great to be back with you. And today I'm so excited to welcome a dear friend of AAPLOG's and of mine and a colleague, Erik Baptist, who is Senior Counsel for the Alliance Defending Freedom. Not only has ADF been an amazing ally to us here at AAPLOG over the years, but they are also a gracious and incredible sponsor of our annual medical conference, the Matthew Bulfin Educational Conference. We're very grateful to ADF for their sponsorship of that very important conference. Just a little bit of background about Erik for any of you who haven't heard him on this podcast before. He's also the director of the Center for Life at ADF, where he leads the team's litigation and advocacy efforts to protect preborn children and their mothers from the harms of abortion. In this leadership role, Erik also collaborates with pro-life allies, works with members of Congress and their staff, and engages with international, national, and local media on pro-life matters. Erik began his career in the trial department of a large international law firm in Washington, D.C. He earned his BA from Vanderbilt and his JD from the George Washington University Law School. During law school, Erik externed for the Honorable Ricardo Urbina of the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia, interned for the Honorable Eric T. Washington of the D.C. Court of Appeals, and served on the George Washington International Law Review. Man, Erik, you were busy during your training. He also previously served as a senior executive service political appointee at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. And when he worked there, he directed EPA's litigation, implementing groundbreaking rulemaking and policies, and collectively helped oversee the work of more than 1,100 EPA lawyers, scientists, and staff. We're very glad that he's now serving at ADF and getting to work with us on many important issues, which we're going to address today. So today we'll be discussing our partnership with ADF and why ADF has supported AAPLOG's mission of advancing life-affirming medicine. But Erik's also going to give us somewhat of an insider's perspective and overview about where several mifepristone legal cases stand today, which of course we've talked about a lot on this podcast before. So Erik, with all of that, thank you so much for joining us again today.
Well, that was quite an introduction, and I love speaking with AAPLOG. I think you are, at the tip of the spear in the pro-life movement and so essential into the pro-life conversation in this country and really educating folks and also advocating with us. And so I'm honored to speak with you today and honored to partner with you in so many different capacities.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. And Erik has heard me say this before, but I often joke when AAPLOG physicians and ADF attorneys are in the same room that I think is one of the few times that you see doctors and lawyers like having fun and getting along and hanging out together. So we certainly love your team at ADF.
Well, I always joke that I'm the black sheep of my family. My dad's I believe an AAPLOG member too, and he's a retired doctor now. But he's I went the law school route, so I mean not the med school route, but I do have an appreciation for the medical profession, living very close to it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, and it certainly is nice to work with attorneys who understand the unique challenges that many of our members are facing. So I just wanted to start off by, I think a lot of our listeners probably are aware of Alliance Defending Freedom and the important work that you all do, but there's probably many who maybe aren't and might be hearing about ADF for the first time. So can you just tell us a little bit about ADF's work involving protecting just overall work, but then also your work specifically at the center that you head that is working to protect the sanctity of human life.
Yeah, ADF is the largest religious nonprofit law firm in the country. And what we essentially do is fight for religious freedom. We fight for unborn life. Fight for parental rights and conscience rights. And so we're at the tip of the spear in many of these cultural issues and these religious freedom fights across the country. And before I came to ADF, or a few years before I came to ADF, I didn't know much about ADF, but you probably know us by our cases. We represent Jack Phillips, the cake baker, and others that have made national news. And so one case that people may have been aware of is known by the name of Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine versus FDA, which AAPLOG was one of the lead plaintiffs in that case. And so we do a lot of pro-life litigation. And so where I'm at today is in the Center for Life. And we are very much focused on protecting the sanctity of life, we say, from the womb to the tomb. So we're both focused for protecting unborn babies' lives, but also the vulnerable from end-of-life issues or assisted suicide laws that are happening domestically. We have an international component here at ADF, ADF International, and they're fighting different battles across the country too, and some similar ones, especially on the life issue. But my work here is focused domestically here in the United States. How do we protect the most vulnerable in our society, especially when we're talking about the sanctity of life?
Absolutely. Well, it's so crucial. I think for people listening or watching this, if you've heard about a major case in the news regarding religious liberty or conscience rights, or as Erik said, parental rights or abortion, it's very likely that ADF has been involved in some way in that case. I know you all have taken so many cases to the Supreme Court successfully, and I have to say, as a former client, plaintiff, in a case that you all were representing us. One thing that really I think was such an encouragement and a support to me was just the understanding and the support that I got, not only from you, Erik, as one of our main attorneys, but from your whole team at ADF. It really was this understanding of, this is a hard thing for us to go through. And I know for many of your clients, it is very hard. Oftentimes their lives have been upended by what has happened to them. And the support that your team provides goes well beyond, just pure legal counsel.
Yeah, most of our clients aren't looking for a fight. They're not looking to sue. But when the government, whether it's a state government or the federal government, takes an action that targets them, they have no choice but to go to court and fight for their rights or fight for others' rights, such as the unborn babies that we fight for as well. And so it's a difficult position to be in. But I have to say, my team is really good at accompanying our clients along the way. And I'm blessed to work with such great colleagues.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, speaking of your colleagues, we have a couple of them that are at our national conference. Gabriella McIntyre, who's on your team, is speaking at our conference. And um, where do you see there's been such a great partnership between our two organizations, and you sort of briefly mentioned it at the beginning about APLOG playing an important role in the pro-life movement, but specifically from your perspective of either defending laws that protect life or going after laws that are antagonistic towards life or towards conscience rights. What do you see as the importance of APLOG as an organization, but also just pro-life medical professionals in general in this fight that we're in right now?
Well, and maybe you already know this, but I'm going to say it anyways, or you do know it, right? Like OBGYNs are so important, especially pro-life ones, right? Like they're in the front lines. They're seeing the damage that abortion is committing to women and their unborn babies. You have two patients, right? The unborn baby and the mother, and you want to take care of both of them and do what's best for them. And you see what the laws are doing. So a lot of the time we see, especially with regards to pro-life laws, misinformation from the other side. They're saying, oh, women are dying in the emergency rooms or they're bleeding out. But you, as a doctor, and your doctors in your organization can say, no, that's not true. If a woman presents with these complications or under these conditions, we absolutely treat them. Nothing in the law prevents us from saving their life or treating them. And that's so important because that misinformation really can sway the public and change laws, get constitutional and ballot initiatives passed because of that misinformation. And we need you there to say, no, we are doctors, we are willing to stand for you. And if some doctor refuses you treatment, there's something wrong with that doctor, not with the law. And we need to make sure they understand that because women need to be informed about their rights and how they are well protected under the law and how doctors can take care of them, especially when they're experiencing life-threatening conditions. And so that's just one aspect of it. The other thing is just I can't share client details, but we have had women come to us because of pro-life doctors treating them. And they're like, I'm in a coerced abortion situation. But this doctor says, hey, I think I know some lawyers for you who can protect you from this situation. You don't actually have to be compelled to have this abortion. If you want to keep your baby, those external forces or those people who are trying to have you have an abortion, go talk to ADF. And so you are literally on the front lines defending those lives. And if they didn't have pro-life doctors and OBGYNs out there, those babies may not be alive today because of that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point for all of our members that are listening to this. If you are seeing a patient who has been harmed by, medical malpractice, I know you guys aren't medical malpractice lawyers, but, if they've been harmed by something that an abortionist has done to them, or if they are in a forced abortion type of situation, or if you are a medical professional who has had your conscience violated, by your training program or by your hospital system, anything like that. We want you to know that ADF is a valuable partner and resource, and they are happy to talk to you and see if what has happened to you is maybe something that can be remedied in some way through the legal system. So that's really important to remember. I think, Erik, you said, how important it is for sort of for women to know, and I think the general public to know that these pro-life laws that are protecting women and children are actually consistent with the way that most doctors practice. We talk about that a lot, that most OBGYNs actually don't do abortions. And I remember having 80 of us in white coats out in front of the Supreme Court the day of the oral arguments in the Dobbs case that ultimately overturned Roe v. Wade. And just what a visual statement that made of overturning this horrible law, this horrible rule, not even a law, this horrible ruling of this court, is actually consistent with the way we practice. And there's all these doctors that are out here supporting this. And in fact, I think it was so shocking to people's systems that the Associated Press published a picture of us and called us anti-abortion activists dressed as medical professionals. And, because I think they just couldn't believe that there are that many doctors that would support the overturning of Roe. And of course, we got that corrected. We weren't dressed as medical professionals. We are. But that's one way that we can all show our support for women, show our support for pro-life laws. But another thing that maybe people outside of sort of the legal world won't understand quite as much that APLOG has done is in every major abortion and conscience case in the last 50 years, APLOG has submitted what's called an amicus brief or a friend of the court brief in support of life or in support of conscience rights to the courts. Can you talk about the importance of amicus briefs and why it's so important that we as a professional medical organization are submitting those to the courts?
These are essential briefs. Like they can be helpful. Sometimes briefs cannot be helpful. These type of briefs that come in. So you really want to be a true friend of the court. And litigants like us who represent the actual parties in this case, we have a finite amount of pages and words we can use to make our arguments. And sometimes the best way to present information, facts, and additional arguments is through these amicus briefs. Because again, we don't have enough space, but I'm like, wow, this would be a really good issue for the court. The court may be interested in this aspect. How do we get this information before the judge? We can't do it ourselves. Organizations like APLOG are so important because you actually provide this and you actually have more of, I would say, the intellectual firepower to make certain arguments, whether from a medical perspective, scientific perspective, or just through your experience on the ground, seeing what happens. And having that perspective is so important because when the judge ultimately issues his or her decision, they may actually come in and cite these briefs in their opinion. So we also do that too. We'll say, see this brief over here, Your Honor, you need to look at this brief in particular. And a lot of our cases, especially when it gets to the Supreme Court, we're blessed with like upwards of 20, 30, 40 briefs in our favor. Sometimes Dobbs was even more, right? But we want to highlight for the court, because there's a stack this high of papers or in briefs, which ones they should pull out and read first and think about how to incorporate in its opinion in our favor. So these are essential briefs, and I'm really, truly grateful for APLOG through your continued support of our cases and just generally pro-life cases because those briefs are important.
Absolutely. Well, and it's so important that the court here true, accurate medical information, but also, specifically when it comes to the issue of abortion, we know that some of the quote unquote mainstream medical organizations or major medical professional societies like ACOG, the American College of OBGYNs, or the Society for Maternal Fetal Medicine, unfortunately have become pro abortion ideologues. And so oftentimes the information they submit to the court is submitted through that ideological lens and not through the lens of accurate medical information. And so it's really important that the court understands that there is not, as ACOG claimed when they declined our invitation to an robust academic debate, they declined, stating that the role of abortion in patients' lives is settled science. And the court needs to understand that that's not the case. It's not settled science in the sense of that there is universal agreement in the medical community about induced abortion. And so they need to hear that, because these judges are not physicians. And so they need to hear from us.
I think more and more too, judges and Supreme Court justices are realizing organizations like ACOG are just abortion advocacy organizations. They're not this mainstream come together like what's best for the medical practice organizations, like what they maybe historically have been viewed as. And that's important because the court can say, oh, this is just the same as ACLU submitting a brief now. Because if you look, and you know this, but like if you see the evolution of ACOG's positions, it's just going to make, it's not based on science, it's based on ideology. And so it's good for the courts to see that. It's really great for AAPLOG to point that out to the courts and spell it out. And your most recent amicus brief did that. So we're very grateful for that information, because it just helps empower us when we go to the court and make these arguments.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of our most recent brief, we are actually recording this podcast right before this hearing is going to happen, but it likely will air after. So we'll have to give an update when we know the result of the hearing. But there's an upcoming hearing that your team is involved with on February 24th in a Louisiana court in the case of the state, I want to make sure I get the case name right, State of Louisiana versus the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. Rosalie Marquezich, a woman who had a coerced abortion, who has been on our podcast, is also a plaintiff in that case. And AAPLOG, as you said, we submitted an amicus brief, which is available on our website. I would encourage people to go and read the brief. I think it's a really important, really good brief. But also, I think, and you correct me if I'm wrong on this, Erik, 21 states, 60 members of Congress, and 58 pro-life organizations have filed friend of the court briefs in support of the state of Louisiana and Rosalie, which is, I think, amazing. I haven't heard how many the other side has, but I think that's pretty amazing. So let's start by, can you just give our listeners a recap of what is this case about? Where does it stand? What is this hearing that's happening on the 24th about? And then we'll move on and discuss more details.
Well, this could be a 45-minute podcast in and of itself, so I'll try to be very concise, and let me know if I assume too much here. But if folks can remember the Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine case against the FDA, we won that at the district court. You and I won again at the Court of Appeals. But when it got to the Supreme Court, they said the plaintiffs in that case lack standing. Now, what is standing? That means, do you have the right to sue? Are you actually truly injured by this action? We respectfully disagree with the court's decision. We thought we had standing, but we have to honor that decision and go back. And so what we did was we partnered with the state of Louisiana, and we are representing Rosalie Marquezich as well, to sue the FDA, because surely states such as Louisiana, who's incurring, this is undisputed at this point, but like upwards of 1,000 unlawful abortions by mail each month in that state. Women like Rosalie, whose then boyfriend ordered the drugs from Aid Access, obtained them, coerced her to take them, and she lost her unborn baby, should have a right to sue and seek redress against the FDA, in particular what the Biden administration did in response to the Dobbs decision to authorize mail-order chemical abortion drugs to be distributed throughout the country, regardless of those state laws, in an attempt to nullify those state laws and eviscerate and gut the promise of the Dobbs decision, which sent it back to the people's representatives, in particular the states. And so this is why this case is important, because pro-life states such as Louisiana cannot meaningfully enforce their laws when we have prescribers in California and New York mailing them willfully, aided and abetted by those sponsors, Danco and GenBioPro, are knowingly letting their prescribers do this. Even if you go to their websites, they actually link to Plan C and those other facilitators who send those drugs into these states such as Louisiana. So right now we have a hearing next week. We're seeking immediate relief from the court to return back to an era where it's not just about pro-life laws and protecting unborn babies, but it's inherently dangerous to send these high-risk drugs to a woman you've never met with in person to examine her to confirm pregnancy, determine gestational age, and identify ectopic pregnancies, to say the least of why you need to have an in-person visit and why this needs to be handed to a woman, not mailed without ever knowing who's on the other side of that laptop screen or on the other side of the phone call. So that's what we're having the court do. We're hoping to have a decision, as soon as possible after the hearing. Of course, the court's going to have to look at all the briefs, all the arguments, and write that opinion. And I can't predict how long it will take the court to do. We may have some indication after our hearing, but until then, that's what we're seeking in this case.
Absolutely. Well, and Erik, I know you were as upset, likely, as I was when our current administration and the FDA, their attorney, submitted their brief in response. So again, I'm not an attorney. You taught me a lot about the legal process during our case against the FDA and how it goes. But the current debate and the current hearing is over a preliminary injunction that you all have requested. Is that right?
Yeah, we call it preliminary relief because there are multiple ways. It could be through an injunction or a stay that's getting to lawyer relief for you. But yes, essentially it's immediate relief pending the case's full completion.
Okay. So in this case, the immediate relief would come in the form of that in-person dispensing requirement being put back into place immediately while the full case works its way through the court. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. So you all asked for that, which of course we think is sort of the least of what the FDA could do right now. Just put this back into place. It's what was in place under the first Trump administration. So it would just be going back to what was in place for decades, actually, since the approval of the drug. And you all asked for that immediate relief. And then tell us what the FDA's response was to that request for immediate relief.
Well, I think the biggest thing about the response was the FDA admitted to unlawful action. They said, oh, yeah, there was not adequate consideration of the safety when it authorized mail order chemical abortion drugs. We couldn't agree more. But then the FDA said, well, yes, we agree it's unlawful. We share the same concerns that, in our case, that the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals said, yes, there was not adequate consideration as well. We share those concerns. So therefore, we're asking this court to hold this case in abeyance or just punt it while we do this purported safety review. But that's an indefinite safety review, which we have not seen any indication of meaningful steps by the administration to do. We don't know if they've even sent an RFP out for the data yet to get that, to even start that study. While the state of Louisiana in particular suffers 1,000 unlawful abortions each month, we have to wait upwards of a year or more just for the FDA to even think about and commence a study, which again is at the start of the process. Even if the FDA studies show that in-person dispensing needs to be restored, that could take another year or two. So then we're looking at 2028 for a decision coming down from the administration, and then that's another election year. I'm not sure anything happens in 2028 or in any presidential election year for that.
Right. Absolutely. Well, and that when I saw that was their response, I mean, honestly, if it wasn't so awful from a just safety standpoint for women, from the fact that preborn children are losing their lives, it would have been laughable, because to claim that you can't simultaneously put back into place the in-person dispensing requirement and look at safety data from the last, 4 years, almost 4.5 years since they lifted the in-person dispensing requirement. I mean, you can do those two things simultaneously, first of all. You don't need to continue this dangerous behavior. And then the other thing, the other part of our brief that we submitted in this case was going over in detail why the studies that the FDA relied upon and states that they relied upon to remove that in-person dispensing requirement weren't actually good studies to use to justify their decision, because none of them actually created the scenario that we are in right now, which is that women are not seen in person at all. Many of the studies required ultrasounds first, for instance. So So again, I'd encourage people to look at that brief, and we certainly are hoping that is it one judge or a panel of judges for this upcoming hearing?
When you're in a federal district court, it's just going to be one judge.
Okay.
But
Okay.
I want to know, this is kind of why I love partnering with you all, or why your briefs are so important, because we were limited in space to what we could put in there. So we just did a high level saying, look, the FDA concluded that these studies are not adequate in and of themselves to show the safety of mail order abortion drugs. But we couldn't unpack that. And so your brief was very important to show, like, look at the flaws of these studies. They relied on studies that had in-person ultrasounds to say that you don't ever have to have an ultrasound or meet with a woman, and you can just mail them. Like, how is that even possible? Those aren't the conditions in reality, and that's not what you're proving. But those are the studies on which they relied. And so your brief was very important to highlight all the various flaws of these studies and who was behind the studies too.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's another eye-opening thing in that brief is actually who was funding the studies. People that stood to benefit significantly financially from if these regulations were lifted from mifepristone. And the FDA, it's somewhat rich to me, I suppose, that the FDA is relying upon studies that required in-person ultrasounds first, considering the FDA has actually never required ultrasounds before mifepristone was dispensed. It just required that, when the in-person visit was in place, it just required that a physician be able to rule out an ectopic pregnancy and be able to confirm how far along in a pregnancy a woman is. Of course, we all know that you can't definitively rule out an ectopic pregnancy without an ultrasound. It's so important. And Eric, I don't know if you remember this, but when we were in our case against the FDA, when we were down in New Orleans at the Fifth Circuit Court, and I was privileged to be able to sit in there and watch you and Aaron Hawley, one of your colleagues, argue this case at the Fifth Circuit, and I was sitting there with Donna Harrison, Dr. Donna Harrison, my predecessor here at AAPLOG, and a true hero and giant of the pro-life movement, I think. We were sitting there and I heard one of the judges, I don't remember what this judge's name was, but one of the judges very astutely asked the FDA's attorney how they were ensuring that women didn't have ectopic pregnancies before they were given this drug. And she said, well, we asked them questions. And he said, okay, what questions do you ask them? And she said, well, we asked them if they have shoulder pain. And Donna and I gasped out loud. We were the only ones that did, because I think as physicians, we were the only ones who maybe truly understood in that moment why that was such a ridiculous answer. And then when we came out of the court, I remember grabbing you and saying, I can't believe she said that. Because, of course, as any physician listening to this knows, if a woman with an ectopic pregnancy has shoulder pain, that means she's got an abdomen full of blood and she will be dead very soon if she doesn't get into emergency surgery. And so, this really, with this removal of the in-person dispensing requirement, this is, to me, the FDA is saying, we don't think that women seeking abortions deserve any level of medical care whatsoever because we're approving this. And of course, we hope that women make a choice for life and make a choice to give their child life. But even if they make that choice to have an abortion, we believe that they deserve the same level of medical care as any other woman, and that they deserve informed consent, and they deserve not to have abortions forced upon them or feel forced to have an abortion, like Rosalie, your client in this case, because of the way these pills are being dispensed. And you said that Rosalie's boyfriend obtained them from Aid Access, which I wasn't even aware of. And I think that, and they are, of course, one of the largest distributors of these dangerous drugs online. And I think it's important for people to be aware that we talk about telehealth or telemedicine abortion, and oftentimes that's what these are called. These are not telemedicine abortions even. Even that, I would argue, has glaring safety deficiencies, but these are Aid Access, for instance. It's a website. You don't talk to anybody. You fill out, you answer questions, and that's it. And so, her boyfriend, not a woman, obviously, who is pregnant, was able to get on there and get these pills. So I think it's really important for people to understand what we are fighting for in this case. And absolutely, we are fighting for preborn children's lives. We're fighting for women to be able to give their babies life and experience motherhood and raise their children. but we are also fighting for women that are absolutely being victimized and harmed by these drugs and the way that they are being dispensed, and for states, to be able to enforce their laws that many of them, including my home state of Indiana, worked very, very hard to pass after the Dobbs decision.
Thanks for that reminder. I had forgotten about that moment at the Fifth Circuit, and I might have to remind my colleagues in co-counsel about that. Then maybe we'll bring that up at the hearing next week as well in Louisiana. But that is appalling. I'll also note that FDA doesn't require the ultrasounds. Like, oh, you don't need that. But then why they justified they needed the ultrasounds for the studies was because, well, how else are we supposed to determine gestational age? We're like, well, that's the point. If you need it for the studies to determine gestational age because the risk increase exponentially, why wouldn't you need them in real life too? And so it begs the question. And so that's why this case is not just about unborn babies, it's about women's health, it's about women's safety, such as Rosalie's safety and other women like her. And so it's such an important case. And we're really, again, glad that you all are still contributing to this effort, because it is, to me, one of the most important, if not the most important, pro-life case in this country right now.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And again, I think this episode is going to come out after the hearing. And so do you have any idea, Erik, how long after the hearing it will take to get a decision on that immediate relief question? Or
I don't, but I'll point out as a data point in history. So when we had our argument 3 years ago in Amarillo, Texas, in our case, we had an argument on March 15th. That court decided our case for preliminary relief on April 7th. So it was a very quick turnaround. And I don't know if this judge operates faster, slower, but that was one thing. So again, we would expect, because the judge actually has expressed, he appreciates we're seeking immediate relief because of an irreparable harm that occurs every day in the state. So every day, literally every day in the state, the Biden REMS stays in place, unborn babies will die, and women's safety is threatened.
absolutely. Okay. Well, we will definitely obviously be keeping a very close eye out for the result of this hearing and ultimately the result of the case. And we'll be sure to update our audience as well when we get a ruling in from that hearing on the immediate relief question, and then ultimately at the end of the case as well. I know that there are several other cases sort of pending before courts related to mifepristone. Can you just, again, this could take 2 hours to recap, but can you just give us just a brief overview of other cases that are moving their way through the courts right now related to mifepristone?
Well, I'm going to just talk about two different types of cases. One is Louisiana is not the only state who's brought a lawsuit too. The states of Missouri, Kansas, and Idaho, who joined our case in Amarillo, continue to fight their battle. They're not at this moment seeking preliminary relief like we are, but that case is now pending in Missouri. The states of Texas and Florida have filed their case again as well against the FDA. That case is not moving as quickly as our case is too, but that case is again refiled in a different place in Texas. So those are the two cases or other cases related directly against what FDA did. There are other cases out there too, dealing with the misinformation regarding mifepristone. Folks like Planned Parenthood have argued and put on their website saying it's safer than Tylenol. That is empirically false and demonstratively false. So the states of Missouri and Florida have separately filed lawsuits against Planned Parenthood. And get this, I think you might not be aware of this fact, but in the state of Florida's lawsuit against Planned Parenthood, what was Planned Parenthood's response to this allegation? Oh, it's what they call mere puffery. We were just exaggerating. No one takes us seriously. It's a marketing thing, but no one actually
Oh, my
you
goodness.
can't actually make this comparison. Everybody knows that. Two different drugs and two different conditions. No, not everybody knows that. And other
Right.
people parrot that line all the way to the Supreme Court. So it's quite a defense for Planned Parenthood now to come in and say, well, we didn't mean what we said. It's just mere puffery and that's not legally actionable. Can you imagine a doctor saying something like that and then backing away? Well, I didn't mean what I said. I said this was safe, but no, you all know what I was trying to say there.
Right. No, I can't. Well, and I was going to say, you said people parrot that line. We've heard pro-abortion doctors parrot that line in congressional hearings. I mean, so even doctors are parroting that. And you're right. We as physicians can't just exaggerate things to fulfill, whatever agenda it is that we have. And for me, that's just another example of Planned Parenthood and other abortion providers on the one hand, they want to be seen as legitimate healthcare providers and, oh, we provide essential healthcare and all of that. But then on the other hand, they don't want to be held to the same standards as the rest of us in healthcare are held to. They don't want to have safety, health and safety regulations. They don't want to have admitting privileges, and they don't want to be held to account for the words that they say, which of course are very important. And for women and people across the country who are deceived into thinking that Planned Parenthood is an actual healthcare provider, of course they're going to take what they say as, well, that must be based on medical facts. So ridiculous. And, let's all hope and pray that the courts in these cases will be reasonable and will we'll see what they need to do in cracking down against these lies, because I think this is the biggest travesty against women right now in this country related to abortion, is that they are being sold a load of lies, not just medical lies about the supposed safety of these drugs, but also lies about their children, lies about that they have to be able to end the lives of their children in order to be empowered and accomplish their dreams. And of course, nothing is further from the truth. And so we really are truth tellers and standing up for truth, and you all just do that so well, especially in the court scenario.
I do want to talk about, like, I always like to, when I talk about chemical abortion, you can go to dark places and like, wow, this sounds all terrible. Like there are stories of hope and happiness too. And two areas I want to focus on. One is abortion pill reversal, and then also adoption, because and I'm going to start with the second one first. I know a lot of women or people will be in a pressure situation like, I can't carry this baby to term. I can't raise this child. I already have too many kids, or this baby is going to have a health condition that's going to be very difficult to deal with. In some of our cases in recent time, like we have had people come out and say, we will adopt that baby. Like if that woman's feeling pressured to have that abortion, we'll step in, we'll take care of it. So women, I want them to know that there are willing and people who have loving families already are willing to add to the family, no matter what condition or complication may arise with that child. They are willing to take on that burden and that blessing, really, at the end of the day. So I think knowing that there's hope, and we've seen people return our phone calls because of that, like, hey, I heard you have someone who may be interested in adopting my baby. And we're like, absolutely, let's talk about it. If that's what's really holding you back from keeping this baby alive, we'll walk you through it. And we have multiple families willing to adopt. So I always put that out there because it really is truly like a thing that it's great to see. And sometimes we don't articulate it enough, but the people who are pro-life, people who are pro-family are more than willing to adopt someone else's child. And unfortunately, there's like a wait list for families who are trying to adopt because of what's happening on the abortion side of that ledger. And so we need to really change. It's a cultural thing. We need to encourage people to have those babies, bring them to term. And it is difficult. I don't doubt that for a mother to give up her baby to adoption. But as you've talked about, the unspoken harms of abortion is that if you abort your unborn baby, there are lifelong psychological and emotional issues that will plague you for the rest of your life. We've seen that time and time again, and it haunts women so
So
many times over.
absolutely. Before you go to your next point, it reminded me of a patient that I had actually in my residency training. So this was years and years ago, but I will never forget her. She was a 16-year-old who got pregnant with her high school boyfriend. And, I took care of her during her pregnancy and then got to do her delivery. And I told her at the time of her delivery, because she and her boyfriend had discussed it a lot, they had discussed possibly parenting. They actually had supportive families, but they kind of discussed what they thought was going to be, and it all was couched in what they thought was going to be best for their child. And ultimately, they came to the decision that because of where they were in their lives, what was best for their child was to be placed with a loving family, a different loving family. And of course, those deliveries are always really tough in some ways, for sure, because it was really hard for her. You could tell she loved that baby so much, and it was really hard. She held the baby for a little while and then placed that baby in the arms of the adoptive parents, and then was really struggling afterwards, but knew that she'd made the right decision. And I told her, I said, you made a decision, first of all, that took the maturity of an adult, and you are 16 and you made this decision for your child. But it also, I think, is one of the most unselfish decisions, actually, that a parent could make, of putting their child's needs ahead of their own desires and recognizing what is going to be best for their child. And so Anyways, that girl who now is a woman always stands out so much in my mind that, yeah, you're right. I think, obviously we want to support parents who want to parent, but also help people to remember that, if they're contemplating abortion, that adoption is out there as a way of making sure that their child is taken care of 100%.
That's great. And that's a really good point. It's one of the most selfless acts. And it's difficult, but it truly is selfless to put that baby up for adoption because what's in the best interest of the child? And we've seen some people make the argument just to like what's in the best interest of the child is to actually abort the baby, not to have the baby alive. I'm like, how could you ever make that argument? But some people believe that, and we need to work with them on that as well and really say, no, we'll accompany you, we'll help you out. And what's best for this child is to be raised and loved by a family, whether it's yours or somebody else's. I'm going to switch to abortion pill reversal too, because I think this is one of the biggest issues as well. Because as we see chemical abortion drugs proliferate around the country, as it is now, like some people celebrate the closing of a Planned Parenthood brick and mortar shop. I agree that's a good thing, but why are they doing it? Why are they closing a facility in Manhattan? Is it the high cost of rent? Now they can do this for cheaper by just mailing the drugs to women without having a physical, I call store, a facility, whatever you want to call it, to peddle their abortions. And so I worry that the number of abortions are increasing nationally post Dobbs, which should not be the case because of the proliferation of abortion drugs. But again, one of the lies the abortion industry sells is that women don't regret their abortions. And what we've seen time and time again is that women who take mifepristone immediately regret their decision. They may have taken it in the moment or maybe in course to take it. And they ask themselves, what can I do? Can I reverse my chemical abortion? And the answer is you can. There's an option, which I always, the more we talk about it, the more women find out about it. And we have had a recent incident where a woman said, like, I had heard about this abortion pill reversal. So when someone had spiked her drink with an abortion drug, she immediately took progesterone. So maybe I need you to explain this because I'm just a lawyer and I only have a lawyer's understanding of how this all works. But I'll talk about our cases after you kind of give a quick explanation. Maybe your audience already knows everything about APR, but I think the more we talk about it, the better it is.
That's right. No, absolutely. And you're right. And we have had other podcast episodes with more detail, but just exactly what you said. By giving progesterone, we can outcompete because mifepristone, the abortion pill, works by blocking the action of progesterone. And so we can use a basic biochemical principle to reverse the effects, similar to when we give Narcan to counteract a fentanyl overdose. It's a very similar biochemical mechanism that progesterone uses to counteract the effect of mifepristone. And according to the data that we have, close to 70% of the time, if we get to a woman in the right time frame and give her the progesterone that she needs and her baby needs, we can save her baby's life. It really is amazing, and something that if we truly believe in choice for women, everybody should support regardless of their stance on abortion.
But because it exposes that lie and it maybe, really truly talks about choice, people who talk about APR, people who prescribe APR are now being targeted by hostile attorneys general across this country. So what ADF has done is stepped in and defended pregnancy centers and those doctors or prescribers who are actually, sending the progesterone to women who need it. Because we've seen in New York, to California and other states, they're saying you can't even talk about APR because that's misinformation. And obviously it's not true. We have studies to support that show the efficacy of APR, but they're coming out because they know that if women learn about this, they may actually choose life. And for whatever reason, through abortion zealotry, they don't want women to have that choice and that knowledge. And so we have defended against Letitia James in New York and the Attorney General in California and other states this right. And we have had a success. We actually won at the District Court in New York. We won on the Court of Appeals, defending the right of pregnancy centers and other prescribers to talk, just to merely talk. It's our First Amendment right to talk and to talk about APR. So we're fighting back and we're winning. We still have more work to do in California, unfortunately, but in Colorado, we defended a prescriber there, Chelsea Minnick, and she's been vindicated. So she's got the ability now to prescribe and give mifepristone out in the state of Colorado, even though the state of Colorado specifically targeted people like Chelsea Minnick. So we've had some success and we want to have more success. But if you ever feel, I'm talking to your audience now, like if you feel pressured, you can't do it because of your state, your local ordinances, or whatever it may be, come talk to ADF in particular, or go talk to you, Dr. Francis, because I think it's important that we vindicate the rights of people just to merely talk about it and also to prescribe APR.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's such an important point to make. And actually, Chelsea Minnick is an APLOG member. So just shows you ADF is working very hard to defend our members and our ability to practice life affirming healthcare. And we were very excited to see that victory in Colorado and in New York as well. And as you said, still fighting this in California so that women can have access to this life-saving care for their children. And yeah, and if there are doctors or other medical professionals listening to this who are not abortion pill reversal prescribers, you really need to be. We need more across the country so that women have access to this care. You can go to our website, aplog.org/abortion pill reversal to find out more. There's a video on there addressing many of the myths that are out there about APR, talking about why those aren't true, why there's good evidence to support this practice. And as Erik said, you also, if you're facing any sort of legal hurdles in being able to provide this care, please reach out to ADF, or you can reach out to us and we can put you in contact with ADF as well. So important that we continue to fight this fight to support abortion pill reversal, because as you said, with the abortion pills being dispensed just so casually now, women are getting no counseling whatsoever before they get these pills, and the rate of regret is going up, I think, significantly. I know the abortion pill reversal hotline is getting a lot more calls since these pills are being dispensed online because more women are regretting their decision. So and just one more, also, just I think neat little story of a connection between APR and ADF. And I was at an ADF event a few years ago for ADF clients, and during that event had to step out because I got a phone call, and that phone call was from the APR network, and I was connected to a woman who regretted taking the first abortion pill, got her started on APR. Her little girl survived and now is gosh, she's probably getting close to 3 years old now. So really, really amazing that this works. And I just saw an update recently from Heartbeat International that runs the APR network that they around 8,000 babies who have been saved because of the miracle of abortion pill reversal. So we're so thankful, Erik, to ADF that you all are working so hard to defend our ability to provide that kind of life affirming health care.
We're just happy to defend you all because you're doing the good work on the front lines and literally saving babies and their mothers from the dangers of abortion.
Well, we're just so happy to be in partnership with you all. And again, thank you so much to ADF for sponsoring our medical education conference this year. It's so, so important, such a great place for life affirming medical professionals to come together to learn the latest updates on legal protections, on the scientific advancements supporting life affirming healthcare, but also just to be able to network with like minded medical professionals to encourage one another as we continue to really advocate for our patients. Erik, I want to give you a chance just to share any last thoughts about the, the importance, maybe something that would encourage our pro-life medical professionals out there who oftentimes feel so alone, as I'm sure many pro-life attorneys do across the country too. But any last words that you would leave with them to encourage them as we all are in this fight together?
Well, you are not alone, and you have people like ADF willing to get your back. If you ever feel pressured, especially in where your place of employment may be secular, it may not be religious, and you feel like maybe they're going to pressure you to violate your conscience, or you can't practice medicine the way your conscience wants you to do, we're here to protect you and defend those rights. So please come to us because we know you have fundamental freedoms that allow you to practice the way you want, especially when it comes to something that may affect your faith and your beliefs. So again, you're not alone. There are so many doctors like you around the country, and you're so important. I cannot stress that enough because without your voices, being whether it's to speak one-on-one with a woman in an unplanned pregnancy or a coerced abortion context, where they find out that life can still be protected and there are lawyers out there to defend them or doctors willing to take care of them in difficult pregnancies, that's so important. Or just having the kind of what APLOG does, have the big national platform to advocate on behalf of pro-life doctors. And that's important too, because again, talking about med students, looking out for them, how their curriculum is kind of designed to promote abortion, or residents as well. And we want to help walk alongside you all and protect your rights. And so I say to encourage, like, be bold is one of our mottos here at ADF. Be bold, be strong, know that, well, we're faith-based. So we say, know that the Lord will have and protect you, but also know that you have ADF here to defend you as well. And we're here with the lawyers that doctors like. So and that my father can be proud of, right? So I know that there are some lawyers out there willing to defend you, and we encourage you because it's so important. Without you, we can't do what we do.
Absolutely. Well, and again, we are so, so thankful, Erik, for you, for your team, and for the entire ADF team as well for the crucial work that you all are doing. So thankful for our partnership, and I know that that will be ongoing. Let's leave people with where can they go if they want to find out more about all of the important work you all are doing.
Our website is adflegal.org. So just go to that website. You can find out all the work that we do. And I always sometimes just say Google ADF FDA Louisiana. You go right to our case page for the latest and greatest what's happening in that particular case. And all our cases are really important. But obviously, for this audience, this may be one of the biggest ones.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Erik, so much for coming on the podcast today. And again, we'll continue to keep people updated on the outcomes of this case and the many other important cases that ADF is working on. Thank you so much, and we'll see you back here next week.
Thanks for having me.
We hope that you enjoyed today's episode of Observations and that it broadened your perspective on women's health and how we can care for both patients, mother and preborn child. If you like this episode, make sure to give us a 5-star review where you can find your podcasts. Make sure that you like this on YouTube and subscribe to our channel for more episodes coming up. And if you have any suggestions on any topics that we should cover or guests that we should have on, make sure that you email us at media@applog.org. Again, thank you for joining us for today's observation, and we'll see you in our next episode.